I've got some troubling news about England's royal family.
The banquet table was prepared, the guest list settled, and Windsor was supposed to project the one thing the monarchy needed most: control. Then Catherine noticed 3 unfamiliar figures being quietly escorted through a restricted corridor, and recognized exactly who they represented. Within minutes, King Charles made an extraordinary decision. The royal banquet was cancelled. Guests were stopped before taking their places, and behind closed doors, one question suddenly mattered more than dinner. Why was Harry's legal team inside Windsor? Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Catherine said little at first. She watched one solicitor disappear beyond a restricted doorway, then turned to an aide and asked who had authorized the group to enter. Windsor Castle was a royal residence and a working royal home where family meetings and sensitive discussions could overlap under strict control. That evening's banquet mattered because senior royals and invited dignitaries had all been placed on one carefully managed schedule. When the aide could not give her a clear answer, her concern sharpened. Charles felt the atmosphere change before anyone explained why. Catherine reached him in a private reception room and told him whom she had seen. Harry's legal team had not been waiting near an administrative office. They had been escorted toward an area used for restricted royal consultations, meaning private meetings involving senior family members and advisors. The king placed his glass on a side table and asked a single question. Was Harry himself inside the castle? No one could confirm that he was. Charles did not hesitate again. He ordered that nobody enter the banquet hall and canceled the dinner before it started. Catherine stayed close as palace staff began tracing the visitors' access. She watched aides check names, schedules, and authorizations, but the answers did not line up. No one could explain who had approved the lawyer's route through Windsor. That gap mattered because access inside the residence depended on permission moving through household staff, private offices, and security. A mistake could be embarrassing. An unexplained approval could be something far worse. Charles ordered the legal visitors held in a separate room until their purpose was established. Then Catherine received the detail that changed the crisis completely. One member of the group had asked for access to material connected with William. The cancelled banquet was no longer the real story. As Charles prepared to bring William into the room, all 3 understood the danger. Harry's representatives may not have come simply to speak for him. They may have come to challenge something the family believed had already been settled. The most unsettling figure inside Windsor that night was the one who was not there. Harry remained physically absent, yet his presence seemed to fill every conversation once his lawyers were discovered. For Charles, this was a confrontation with his own son, without the mercy of seeing his face. For William, it revived wounds he had spent years containing. And for Catherine, the discovery placed her directly between a father, 2 brothers, and a legal conflict nobody wanted entering the heart of Windsor. Charles felt the crisis in 2 directions at once. He was the king, but he was also a father watching a rupture cross into royal space. Windsor was not simply a residence. It was a working royal household where family decisions and official duties could collide under the same roof. That mattered because any legal dispute involving Harry could wound the family, while also challenging discipline expected around the monarch. William carried fear. He knew that protecting his immediate family and his future role meant drawing lines that could look cold from the outside. When Charles asked him whether any unfinished dispute with Harry still existed, the prince did not answer at once. He waited, then admitted there had been one matter months earlier that he believed had already been closed. The pause told his father more than the answer. Catherine felt the weight of that admission almost immediately. She told William that she wished she had been wrong about the faces she recognized in the corridor. He answered that she had done exactly what she should have done, But the anger beneath his controlled voice was impossible to miss. She had not created the problem, yet she had become the person who exposed it. Then, an aide brought another detail. Harry's representatives had arrived with pre-arranged identification and seemed to know exactly which entrance to use. Their legal team had not behaved like confused visitors or people sent to the wrong part of the castle. They had come prepared, and that preparation pulled William back to an earlier exchange with his brother. Harry had once warned him that certain family arrangements could not simply be decided without his voice being heard. At the time, William dismissed it as frustration. Now the memory landed differently. Catherine studied the access record again and noticed the detail nobody else had caught. The lawyers' names had been entered before the banquet invitations were reconfirmed that afternoon. Their arrival had been planned before anyone expected trouble, and that timeline forced the family to look backwards, toward a private confrontation months earlier, the moment Harry first made clear that he would not accept a decision made inside Windsor. The crisis did not begin at the banquet. Its true beginning came months earlier, inside a quiet Windsor sitting room where two brothers met without cameras, ceremony, or public statements. William believed the conversation would settle an uncomfortable family matter. Harry believed the opposite. What followed was brief, controlled, and devastating. One sentence ended the meeting. One closed door hardened the dispute. And when Catherine remembered that afternoon, she understood exactly why the lawyer's appearance had frightened Charles so quickly. William had gone into that earlier meeting determined to establish limits, not provoke another family war. The disagreement centered on Harry's access to selected family materials, estate consultations, and private discussions affecting the next royal generation. An estate consultation was simply a formal discussion about property, family interests, or arrangements tied to royal holdings and responsibilities. The prince believed automatic access was no longer workable because private family matters and future royal planning had become too sensitive to leave undefined. Charles had tried to stop the disagreement from hardening long before lawyers appeared. He urged both sons to keep the matter private and avoid turning another family fracture into a formal contest. The king hoped time would cool resentment and allow trust to recover. But during that Windsor meeting, William finally told Harry that future access to restricted consultations would require direct approval rather than automatic inclusion. The words landed hard. Harry slowly pushed his chair back. Then, "You are treating me as an outsider." William did not soften the boundary. He answered that responsibility had changed, and that access could no longer be assumed simply because they were brothers. Harry stood and warned that family decisions could not erase legal rights. Then he walked out. The prince remained seated after the door closed, knowing something had shifted beyond anger. Their dispute had become a question of position, recognition, and control. Charles underestimated what followed. Harry later sent a formal private communication, a written notice intended to place a concern clearly on record, asking that no irreversible decision involving disputed family interests move forward without notice. The king read it as pressure from a wounded son, not as the beginning of legal action. That judgment now returned with brutal force. Catherine connected the final piece. She remembered that the deadline mentioned in Harry's communication fell close to the night of the cancelled banquet. The timing suddenly looked deliberate. Then an aide approached Charles and quietly confirmed that the legal representatives had specifically requested contact with someone attached to William's office. The king's expression changed at once. What began as an argument between brothers had entered Windsor through official channels, and now William wanted to face the lawyers himself. William did not send an aide. He did not wait for a written summary. With the banquet abandoned and guests quietly redirected, he walked straight toward the room where Harry's legal representatives were waiting. Charles tried to slow the moment before it became something irreversible. Catherine watched her husband stop outside the door, gather himself, and enter. What happened next was not a shouting match. It was colder than that. Every sentence carried years of unresolved history. Charles wanted Palace Council to take control first. Palace Council meant the lawyers and legal advisors who protect the monarch's official interests and handle disputes before they reach the family directly. The king believed distance might prevent emotion from contaminating the issue. William refused. If his name, his decisions, and his boundaries had brought Harry's representatives into Windsor, then he wanted to hear their purpose from them. Catherine stayed in the adjoining room because she had identified the visitors and because the prince had quietly asked her not to leave. William closed the door himself. He sat opposite the senior solicitor and allowed several seconds of silence to pass before speaking. "What does my brother want from this house tonight?" The lawyer answered with unsettling calm. Harry's position, he said, was not being presented as a personal demand. The team had come to preserve his ability to challenge decisions before they became permanent. The prince's hand tightened around the arm of his chair, but his voice remained controlled. William pressed harder. He asked whether Harry had personally authorized the timing of the visit, and whether his brother knew the legal team would arrive on the night of a royal banquet. The solicitor would not discuss private instructions beyond what was necessary. That refusal stung, because it left the prince confronting his brother through another person's carefully chosen words. Catherine, waiting nearby, could sense how dangerous that distance had become, even without hearing every sentence. Then the real purpose emerged. The lawyers wanted written assurance that disputed family arrangements and restricted access decisions would not be treated as final until Harry's position had been formally acknowledged. A restricted access decision simply meant a ruling about who could enter certain private royal meetings, records, or consultations. William heard the distinction immediately. They were not demanding entry that night. They were trying to stop a door from closing permanently. The senior solicitor delivered one final detail. Their attendance had never been intended as a secret. They believed the correct Windsor personnel had already been informed. Charles heard enough from the adjoining consultation to understand the danger. His concern shifted away from Harry's lawyers and toward his own household. If the legal team thought they had permission to enter, then someone inside Windsor had opened the door. For the first time that evening, Harry stopped being Charles's immediate concern. The king now wanted one name: who authorized the lawyers to enter Windsor. Access to a royal residence is controlled through layers of staff, security, scheduling, and private offices. Yet somewhere in that chain, permission had apparently been granted. Charles summoned senior aides one by one. William waited. Catherine said almost nothing. Then an access notation surfaced, and what it revealed forced the king to confront an uncomfortable possibility inside his own household. Charles understood how complicated the answer could become. Daily access inside Windsor could pass through private secretaries, household officials, security desks, and authorized offices before ever reaching him directly. A private secretary is a senior aide who manages sensitive correspondence, meetings, and access around a royal figure. That mattered because even when the monarch held ultimate authority, one misunderstood instruction could move through several layers before anyone realized what had happened. The cancelled banquet now became something more than an emotional reaction. Charles refused to restart the evening, while the access failure remained unexplained. Ceremony, he knew, was meaningless if the household beneath it could not account for who had been admitted and why. William agreed. Catherine stayed close, fully aware that her discovery had forced the family into a deeper examination of the very system designed to protect them. Charles sat alone with the entry record for several minutes. He read the same line twice, removed his glasses, and finally asked a senior aide whether he could still trust the machinery surrounding his family. The answer did not come quickly enough. Then one official quietly suggested that the situation might have remained manageable if Catherine had not raised the alarm so fast. She did not flinch. Recognizing a serious problem, she replied, was not the same as creating one. William backed her immediately. Then the authorization trail began to make sense. The notation pointed toward an administrative approval connected to preparations for a private family consultation, not the banquet. Two separate schedules had collided. One office had interpreted an earlier request as permission for a limited legal meeting, and nobody had warned Charles that the meeting would happen during the royal dinner. The relief was real, but it was incomplete. There appeared to be no hidden conspiracy, only a dangerous assumption that had traveled too far without challenge. Charles refused to leave it there. He ordered direct contact with Harry before sunrise. The mystery of the open door was narrowing, but the emotional crisis was about to grow wider, because now the king intended to hear from the son whose lawyers had turned ceremony into a family reckoning. By now, the banquet hall stood unused. Senior staff had been dismissed from normal duties, and Windsor was operating around a dispute nobody had expected to confront that night. Then Harry responded. His message did not contain an apology. It did not contain a threat either. Instead, it forced Charles to recognize something far more painful. His younger son believed formal representation had become necessary because private family conversations no longer protected his place within the family. Charles ordered the household to describe the cancellation only as an urgent private matter. Guests left without being told why, while aides began rearranging engagements affected by the disruption. That restraint mattered, because one uncontrolled explanation could turn a family dispute into a public royal crisis. Harry's legal representatives also agreed not to push the matter further that night, once they received confirmation that their concerns would be formally acknowledged the next morning. Charles read his son's written response alone. A formal representation was simply a recorded legal position placed on behalf of someone when direct conversation had failed to settle the issue. The king reached the final line, set the message down, and remained silent. Then he told an aide to leave him alone for 5 minutes. Harry had not demanded immediate access. He had argued that decisions affecting his place within the family should not become permanent without his objection being recorded. William reacted differently when he heard the explanation. Harry insisted through the written response that he had never intended to sabotage the banquet. The prince gave one bitter laugh, then stopped himself. Catherine watched his anger collapse into something heavier. He admitted that intention did not erase what the night had done. A private disagreement between brothers had now required lawyers, cancelled ceremony, and forced their father to choose between family loyalty and royal control. Charles began to see a pattern he had avoided for too long. Years of speaking through aides, carefully managed letters, legal representatives, and limited meetings had changed the shape of every disagreement between his sons. Each unresolved hurt was becoming an official problem because nobody trusted an ordinary conversation to survive. Harry had reached for legal protection because he believed family words were no longer enough. William had reached for boundaries because he believed trust itself had become dangerous. Then Charles made another decision. He asked William to meet him alone before dawn. No advisors, no private secretaries, no counsel, not even Catherine. The legal confrontation had reached its limit. What remained could not be solved by access records or solicitors, and before Windsor woke, a father and his eldest son would have to decide whether Harry would be answered as an institution or as family. Before dawn, the machinery around the monarchy briefly disappeared. No lawyers sat at the table. No private secretaries took notes. No household officials stood ready with protocol. Charles and William met alone, father and son, carrying different fears about the same family. The king feared losing another relationship behind procedure. William feared that lowering boundaries would reopen every wound those boundaries were designed to contain. For once, neither could hide behind duty. And what Charles said next changed the direction of the crisis. Charles knew the legal team had entered Windsor because of an administrative misunderstanding tied to a real unresolved dispute, not because Harry had secretly forced his way inside. That mattered because the difference between deception and confusion could determine whether the family moved toward punishment or repair. William still resisted any quick compromise. The prince believed private royal consultations, restricted meetings where sensitive family or official matters were discussed, needed firm limits, especially when decisions affected those carrying active royal responsibilities. William did not soften when the conversation turned personal. He told his father that boundaries were not cruelty, they were protection. Trusting Harry, he said, had repeatedly carried consequences for Catherine and their children. Charles let the words settle, then answered carefully. He said, limits could remain without turning every disagreement into permanent banishment. The king reminded him that defending one branch of the family could not require abandoning another forever. Silence followed. William finally admitted that his anger the previous evening had not come only from Harry's lawyers appearing at Windsor. It had come from fear. He feared losing control of decisions he believed were necessary, feared exposing Catherine to another painful conflict, and feared that every attempt at reconciliation might reopen wounds he had fought to contain. Charles understood that fear because his own had taken a different form. He feared watching both sons become strangers through procedure. Charles then offered the compromise. Harry's legal concerns would be formally acknowledged, meaning his objections would be placed on record, but he would receive no automatic access and no expanded royal role. Future disputed matters would receive direct written notice before decisions became final, preventing another confrontation from arriving without warning. William agreed, but only on one condition. Family correspondence and legal representation would remain completely separate from ceremonial royal events. Charles accepted immediately. When the meeting ended, the king asked him to tell Catherine personally that the crisis had been contained, and that her decision to speak up had prevented something worse. For the first time since the banquet was cancelled, Windsor had a path forward, but its silence could not hold much longer. By morning, the outside world had already noticed that an important royal dinner had vanished without explanation. By sunrise, Windsor's private crisis was becoming public curiosity. Guests had departed unexpectedly. Vehicles had moved at unusual hours. A major royal banquet had simply disappeared from the evening schedule. The palace could control its statement, but it could not control the questions. Then one front page transformed the mystery into a national spectacle. Suddenly, Charles's private decision was being judged as royal weakness, royal strength, family collapse, and institutional discipline, all at once. Charles moved quickly to contain the public damage. The palace confirmed only that the banquet had been cancelled because of an urgent private matter and that no security threat had taken place. A palace statement was an official message released on behalf of the royal household to clarify events without exposing private detail. That distinction mattered because rumors of danger inside Windsor could have created far greater panic than the family dispute itself. The king wanted the truth narrowed before speculation widened it. Catherine watched the morning coverage with William, as broadcasters debated whether the cancellation showed instability or decisive leadership. Her unease deepened when commentators began suggesting she had first raised concerns inside the castle. The princess worried that her instinctive decision was being turned into public drama. William told her not to regret acting quickly. He reminded her that ignoring the lawyers would not have made the problem disappear. It would only have allowed the crisis to grow in silence. Charles refused to let staff absorb the blame. He instructed aides that every internal briefing must state clearly that the cancellation had been his decision alone. The king understood the risk. If courtiers were blamed, the story would become one of household chaos. If Catherine was blamed, it would become a family feud. He chose instead to carry the decision himself, even knowing that public judgment would land directly on him. Then the morning newspaper appeared. Across the front page were the words, "Dinner stopped at Windsor," followed by an account of guests leaving before the formal meal began. Outside Windsor Castle, a small crowd gathered while broadcasters delivered live updates from beyond the gates. The image captured the mood perfectly. Curiosity outside, control being rebuilt within. William noticed the tone begin to shift once palace clarification ruled out a security confrontation among the guests. Attention moved toward the private legal dispute and Charles's response to it. The crisis no longer looked like sudden royal collapse. It looked like a painful family conflict the monarch had chosen to confront rather than hide. But one task remained. Charles had contained the lawyers, reached an agreement with William, and accepted public responsibility. Now he owed Catherine something private. The world had delivered its judgment from outside the walls. Windsor still had to deliver its own. The banquet never happened. The tables were cleared, the guests went home, and an evening designed to display royal continuity instead exposed the pressure beneath it. Yet by the following day, something important had changed. Harry had not regained unrestricted access. William had not surrendered the boundaries he believed necessary. Charles had not allowed legal pressure to dictate the monarchy's decisions. And Catherine, whose single observation triggered the crisis, had proved that sometimes preserving stability requires being willing to interrupt the appearance of it. Charles moved first to make the resolution official. Harry's legal concerns would be formally acknowledged, but access to restricted royal consultations would remain controlled. A royal consultation was simply a private meeting where senior family members and advisors discussed sensitive family or institutional matters. The king also approved a new notification process so that future legal meetings could never again collide with major ceremonial events. That mattered, because Windsor could not afford another night where private conflict and public duty crashed into each other without warning. Charles refused to apologize for canceling the banquet. He believed continuing with ceremony while senior royals were distracted by an unresolved legal confrontation would have been far more damaging. Later, he spoke privately with Catherine and told her she had been right to act immediately. She admitted that part of her feared she had turned a manageable problem into a crisis. The king answered quietly that the crisis already existed. She had simply been the first person to see it clearly. William reached his own conclusion. He told Catherine that the night had changed how he understood the dispute with Harry. His boundaries would remain, and he still believed his immediate family needed protection. But the prince also recognized that silence, aides, and legal intermediaries had sometimes made those boundaries feel colder and more permanent than he intended. Catherine listened without pushing him further. For the first time, his anger sounded less like defiance and more like acceptance. Harry's position was finally settled. His objection was recorded. His legal team received formal acknowledgement, but no automatic access or special concession was granted. He was not erased. He was not restored to a place the palace had already restricted. Neither side got everything, and neither side was publicly humiliated. Charles understood the deeper lesson. The monarchy could not survive by performing calm while family fractures hardened beneath protocol. Catherine had not broken the evening. She had prevented misunderstanding from becoming open warfare. The king had drawn a line that allowed legal concerns to be heard without surrendering royal authority. Windsor lost one banquet, but it recovered something more valuable: control without cruelty, boundaries without total exclusion, and the courage to confront a crisis before ceremony could hide it. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.